Merry Christmas and welcome to a special Christmas episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House here with Charles Coulombe.
And we're here at the Tumblr House workshop. As you see, with the Tumblr House elf and myself, I feel very Christmassy, very Yule-y.
Yeah. We've got a lot of Christmas questions today, but first let's start out with two questions on the Middle Ages from our friends on Twitter.
Oh boy, okay.
Alex Forrest from Twitter asks, in what sort of ways did the church shape city life and form during the High Middle Ages?
Well, that's a very good question, and the answer is in every imaginable way. In the sense that, remember that cities, firstly, the very name city, implied that there was a cathedral around it.
Oh.
If you didn't have a cathedral, it was a town.
Oh, okay.
And the church was at the center. The main church was at the center of the town. You know, like with us, it's the factories.
Yeah.
Because that's what we were consecrated to, industry. Well, back then, the center were churches, and of course, sometimes there were shrines, you know, of great saints or whatever. So that was part of it. And of course, if you were a pilgrimage center, either local or much bigger, that contributed a great deal to the life of the town. And the feast day of the town, even as is still the case in a lot of culturally Catholic places today in Europe and Latin America, the feast day of the town or city was a big thing.
Yeah. With
a high mass in the cathedral, the principal church, processions, fiestas, as we say, all sorts of things would go on. The mayor, or whatever they call the chief executive of the town, was a big part of processions and church functions like Corpus Christi, which is, again, still the case in a lot of culturally Catholic places around the world. But there was more to it than that, because, and I'm wildly generalizing, just so you'll know.
Okay.
But generally speaking, as the Middle Ages wore on, towns would start out as centers of church and trade, and then they begin to expand. And eventually, if they got big enough, they would get a charter of liberties of some kind from either the king of the place or the local lord, which meant they were no longer directly under him. Now in France, of course, you had these royal cities, the good towns, as they were called. They were particularly, as the French monarchy got stronger, they became centers of royal influence. In the whole Roman Empire, just the opposite happened. As the empire became increasingly diffuse, the imperial free cities turned into little republics that just had a glancing allegiance to the crown.
Why did it happen that way?
Well, for a lot of reasons. In the case of the Holy Roman Empire, it's because the emperor was busy with things other than making a unified country out of Germany. Whereas at the same time, the French and English kings and some of the others were establishing more centralized states in their own places. Now, having said that, too, there's a vaguely similar story to the major towns, the major cities. Very often, if a place was a cathedral city, after the fall of the Roman Empire, the bishop would become the major temporal ruler in the town. But as the period wore on, local noblemen became more and more powerful, or they called patricians in towns. But something else happened, and that was the growth in trade and the growth in crafts. And these produced two kinds of bodies, craft guilds and merchant guilds. These guilds were, on the one hand, they performed a very secular purpose, i.e. in the case of the merchant guilds, bring unity to the merchants, and in the case of the various crafts, not only doing that, but also allowing them to regulate the craft, to look after widows and orphans, both merchant and craft. But there was also a heavy religious component to it, because they would be very devoted to the patron saint of the craft. They would very often endow a chapel or a side chapel in a larger church. The feast day of the patron of the guild would be a big deal. And then on some major feast days, typical example is Chester in England. The major craft guilds would perform mystery plays on the major feast days of the church. So, for instance, you had these big Corpus Christi processions in Chester. It wasn't just the Blessed Sacrament and various officials and so on, although they were there too.
Yeah.
Various confraternities. But you had these sort of floats with mystery plays going on the floats.
Wow.
Each presented by a different guild.
Wow, that's cool.
And they spent the whole year putting it together.
Wow.
So it was kind of like getting ready for the Rose Parade here.
Yeah.
It's same idea.
Is the Rose Parade, does that have roots in that? I mean, that's...
No,
Okay.
it's sort of a vaguely parallel development for the same reason. And the Rose Parade originally got its start with the Valley Hunt Club, which is to this day a private club in Pasadena. They wanted to promote the town. And because of the beautiful weather and all that, and the blossoms year-round, because there are always roses growing in Pasadena.
Yeah.
That was the start of the thing. And then all sorts of other civic groups got involved, and the next thing you knew, we had the Rose Parade, as it is now.
Okay.
But it's similar in the sense that both represented, on the one hand, the love of God and the saints and so on and so forth, the other, the love of roses and gardening. But they also had a very important civic thing.
Yeah.
Because for Pasadena and for the towns of the San Gabriel Valley, the Rose Parade is a very, very important thing. It's our signature.
Yeah.
Hey world, we're here, we exist.
Yeah.
Well, so too did the mystery plays have a similar function to a degree. People would come from all over to go to Chester to watch the Corpus Christi parade, the Corpus Christi procession, so they could see. What's important to remember is that we tend to separate the religious from everything else. Our medieval ancestors didn't. And so they were just doing it to attract people to their town. That was one of the reasons. Sure. Just like if you've got something in several of the Gulf Coast towns today, the blessing of the fleet's a big deal. And yeah, part of it is to bring people to Biloxi or Bay St. Louis or wherever it's going on. But that's only part of it. Part of it's also to impart the blessings of God to the fishing fleet. Part of it takes somebody as stupid as us to think that these two both beneficial goals should be opposed to each other. You've got to be pretty dumb to do that, and we are, and I embrace that. If you embrace stupidity, you'll be a lot happier in this life.
Okay, a gentleman with the name Among the Ruins on Twitter asks, was the church more effective at taking care of the poor and the sick during the Middle Ages compared to federal welfare today?
It depends on what you mean by effective. If you mean by producing a whole underclass of perpetually dependent and entitled feeling people who are not really in a position to do much of anything except get upset and break things, the church was another failure. And the feds have done a great job. If, on the other hand, you're talking about an all-inclusive program of service that looks both to improving their souls, their minds, and their bodies, and finding those who can work real work, and getting them to be productive members of society, well, then I have to say the church was a success and we're failures. But at least it's our tax money at work with the federal program, whereas with the religious in the Middle Ages, the government didn't pay for it.
Wait, who paid for it?
Who pays for anything with the church? People who donated. And of course, don't forget too that the medieval church had a lot of property, and a lot of that property were farmlands. And those farmlands, and they also rented out a lot of their farmlands. One of the interesting things about the Middle Ages was that people they preferred renting from the church to secular lords. The reason for that was simply because whenever a secular lord died, all the rents had to be renegotiated. But a church institution never dies. So you would very often be locked into the same rate your great-great-grandfather had paid.
Wow.
So people kind of liked that a lot.
Not accounting for inflation or anything? I mean, was there? I mean...
There wasn't that much inflation, but no, they didn't account for it because they made the deal. See, again, it's a very, very different frame of reference.
Yeah.
In those days, they considered inflating money, i.e. Adulterating the currency, to be a crime and a sin.
Yeah.
And it was considered a terrible sin for the king's say, to lessen the amount of gold in the coinage or silver.
Mm-hmm.
With us, of course, it's standard policy because we're so much better. But those ignorant, superstitious forebears of ours, they didn't know what they were doing.
No, clearly not.
Yeah.
Okay, commence the Christmas questions.
Oh boy.
Oberon, king of the forest, sent in several great Christmas questions.
I salute the king of all the elves. And although not really an elf myself, you are.
Yes.
And don't forget, I'm referred to in Clement Moore's Night Before Christmas as a right jolly old elf. So maybe there's some vestigial connection
There you go.
All right.
All right.
My hat's off to you, O Master. Merry Christmas and a happy Yuletide from your faithful servants here at the Tumbler House Workshop.
Okay. I've often heard people say that Christmas is actually a pagan holiday, or that it has pagan origins. What is the truth of it? As far as I'm aware, even scholars still debate this.
Well, they debate it because they're boobs. No. Well, does it have pagan roots? Some of the customs were picked up from paganry because that's simply what was there.
Like what?
Well, the Christmas tree. Now, there are a lot of differing stories as to the origins of the Christmas tree. Some would like to say Martin Luther started it. Others that it started a lot earlier. Certainly the idea of bringing in evergreens from the cold it was something that our pagan ancestors thought about, those that worshiped Thor, because the pine tree was sacred to Thor. But that's not why people do it now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you might as well say that because we use candles, that's pagan. The use of holy water is pagan. The use of incense is pagan. See, there are only a limited number of things people can do. The wearing of clothing is a pagan custom. Talking is a pagan custom. Eating is a pagan custom. All of these things originated with the heathen. So they should be avoided. My advice, if you're that worried about Christmas's heathen origins, stop breathing, because the pagans did it first. And that way you'll avoid any touch of paganry. It's a lot of rot. It's meant to discredit what we do. And all I can say is to reverse, to anyone who's upset with Christmas because it's pagan, I can only wish you what Ebenezer Scrooge wished in reverse. You know, he said, anyone who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be buried in his own plum pudding with a stake of holly through his heart. Well, that's how I feel to the enemies of Christmas. I'd like to bury you in my plum pudding and stick a stick of holly through your heart.
Okay. Second question. Santa Claus isn't the only gift giver around. There have been others, elves, house sprites, etc. Can you tell us about the different gift givers, the origin of the Christmas gift giver, and how that tradition evolved over the centuries?
Well, sure. Firstly, the notion of gift giving in the Christmas time. And you got to remember that there are, to my knowledge, 4 different days in the season when people give gifts, depending on where you come from, what your culture is. St. Nicholas's Day, the night of the 5th, St. Nicholas will come and drop off goodies in Central Europe and Germany and the Netherlands and Old New York. I'm sorry. Then you've got Christmas, and Christmas has a wide variety of people. Père Noël, or Father Christmas, Santa Claus, these people. Then in northern Germany you've got the Christkind, about which was the Christ child, basically. And then on the Epiphany, in both Russia and Italy, you've got Befana. And Befana was an old Italian woman. No, she wasn't Italian, but she was an old woman who laughed. And she did something, I forget what it was now. She laughed at the 3 kings or something. She was very annoying. But she refused to help out. And so she's punished by giving gifts, which she's adjusted to, apparently. It doesn't bother her as much as you might think. And then, of course, there are the 3 kings. And I suspect it is with the 3 kings that we have the origin of Christmas gift giving. And I also should say in France and certain other places, you don't give gifts on Christmas, but on New Year's. parts of France. I mean, these customs vary from place to place, time to time. But those are the four major days. December 6th, Christmas, New Year's, Epiphany.
Being Italian, I'm a little familiar with La Befana.
Yeah.
Is she a witch?
Some people say so. I've never met her personally.
She's got a broom.
She does have a broom, and she's very threatening. And apparently she used it to smack bad boys and girls. Whereas St. Nicholas or Santa Claus will simply give you a lump of coal.
Mm-hmm.
Although very often he travels with somebody called Zwart Piet in the Netherlands, Nicht Ruprecht in Germany, Krampus in Austria. And he'll punish. You don't want to be punished. So, of course, because Zwart Piet is black, literally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't mean African American, I mean black.
Yeah.
He's now being considered as a sign of racism by the moronic in the Netherlands. Remember, there's nothing so hallowed, or so venerable, or so pleasant and amusing and fun that there isn't some moron somewhere that doesn't want to wreck it. And again, just as I'd like to do for the enemies of Christmas, to all such killjoys, all that I could do for you, which you would like to do to everyone else. As a Christmas gift, of course.
Yes.
And I would do it on any one of those 4 days that the killjoy in question wanted.
Okay. Third question. Some traditional Catholics of a German-Austrian background substitute good old Saint Nick for the Christkind. From the way I understand it, the Christkind was an invention by the heretic Martin Luther as a means of pulling people away from the cult of the saints. Whether that is true or not, I'm wondering who's the better choice for Catholic families, Saint Nick or the Christkind?
I've heard this too, and frankly, I'm not sure that it's true about Luther, but I have heard it, and I don't know. I don't have an alternative story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like using the Christ child as the gift giver, and the reason why I don't like it is because sooner or later you're going to have to explain that the appearance of gifts may not have a supernatural origin. It's hard enough explaining about the real St. Nicholas.
Yeah.
Drawing the Christ child into it, I'm not comfortable with, but that's just me.
Yeah.
I mean, if it works for you, great. You know, it's, again, like as with the killjoys, you know, we don't want to get, if you've got a family tradition where the infant Jesus brings the gifts, and that's working well, then God bless you, and may He continue to bring them for many years more.
Okay. Our last question for today, Oberon asks, who is the gift giver in your family when you were growing up? And who is it in your household today? And no, the answer can't be Cardinal Mahoney.
Well, firstly, he's destroyed the whole question, because of course Cardinal Mahoney did bring the gifts when I was little. We'd leave out a dish of brownies and scotch, and in the morning the brownies would be gone and the scotch glass would be empty, and we'd have coal in our stockings. No, none of that's true. Stop that. No, who was it who brought it? Well, frankly, it was Santa Claus. It was Père Noël. And it took me a long time to find out that he wasn't really coming. You know, I was like 23 or something. Well, all right, maybe not quite that old,
yeah.
18. But no, I remember when I frankly heard as early as when I was 6 terrible rumors from bad children that it wasn't Santa Claus. But I refused to believe it because I was a good kid.
Yeah.
And I was able to hold on to my belief in Santa until at least 9. I have to admit it was hard. But my father, when the unfortunate reality came out, my father explained it to me in a very, very sensitive way. And this is why I go back to not really wanting to involve the baby Jesus in this process. Because he was there in a world of his own on the nativity set. You know, that was the whole reason for being there.
Yeah.
But Santa, Père Noël, my father explained to me that he was St. Nicholas. And that the spirit of St. Nicholas is the most real thing on earth. And that, you know, we have these people dressed up as Santa and go through all this sort of thing to bring a bit more magic and enchantment for children than there would be otherwise. He said, "You're not going to seriously tell me that you didn't like the magic and enchantment." And I said, "Well, no, I couldn't say that." He said, "Well, and honestly, I know a lot of Catholic families have the thing, should we lie to our children? You don't really want to put it that way. While, as I've said on the one hand, I don't like identifying the baby Jesus too closely with the whole thing because of the inevitable disappointment. By the same token, enchantment is an important and powerful thing. Where would our lives be without it? Very poor things. If you think about it, that's what love is about. When a parent looks at his family, a father looks at his family, a mother looks at her family, when grown-up children look at the elderly parents they have to care for, what is it that makes them continue to make the sacrifices they have to make? The answer is enchantment. Because, and you can say, oh, they're deluding themselves. You can. And a lot of people do today. That's why we live in such a nasty, unpleasant world. But the truth of it is that enchantment, and not just the Christmas kind, although it's a good example, that enchantment flows through every pore of our being if we'll let it. Every day, God comes down to earth in bread and wine. That's enchantment. The age of miracles is not over. I'm gearing up to write this book on the Holy Grail, so I'm doing my research. Well, there have been a lot of these Eucharistic miracles in recent years. Strange things. Bread and wine turned to blood and flesh, just like Lanciano. Weird stuff. The age of miracles is not past, neither is the age of wonders. And if we realize that, whatever unpleasantries we have to go through, we'll manage them. And we'll be happy, more or less, with them. Those who refuse to see the enchantment, who refuse to share the joy of dancing the great dance, they're the ones who are deluding themselves. And deluding themselves with a bloody, unpleasant kind of delusion. It's one thing to have the delusion that you're a millionaire and you go wherever you like and travel to the Riviera, but at least it's a pleasant delusion. Imagine that you deludedly thought you were working at a coal mine and were going to die at age 45. That's a pretty stupid kind of delusion to have. And yet, that's the sort of delusion the world we live in would like us to have. That it's all dreadful and all awful. By no means. I took my nephew up to Santa Barbara last weekend to see the Christmas Revels, which are a presentation that started in Cambridge, Massachusetts back in the 50s, and about 9 Revels companies around the country now. And what they do are explorations of Christmas through different cultures. In this case, it was Scottish and medieval Scottish. Mm-hmm. But they do everything: Spanish, French, Cajun. It depends on where you are, what they're doing that year. But it was a wonderful show, and the people doing it were having a good time and all that. And that's the thing about Christmas. It's the only one of our feasts yet that the world as a whole still feels some obligation to bow to. They may try to cover it up with holiday, or by saying it's pagan, or by doing everything they can to efface its true nature. But they'll fail. And so, if we have no more questions, I would just like to say to our wonderful audience here at episode 15, it's been quite a ride this year, and next year promises to be even wilder. Don't forget Christmas and the joy that I hope each and every one of you are going to feel over the next few days. And keep it going, not just to the New Year, not just to the Epiphany. Keep it going to Candlemas, Its last gasp is really until you get your throat blessed on February 3rd for St. Blaise Day. It isn't the greatest feast we have, that's Easter, but it's a splendid one. And from the bottom of my heart, and I know my elven companion here feels the same way, God bless all of you and give each of you a very merry, holy, and happy Christmas and the very best of New Year's. God bless you and good afternoon.